I spent most of my life on the railroad, 2 railroads to be exact, but you could only see one of them, and they sure went to different destinations. One of them ran on steel and timber. The other one ran on faith and determination. One of them, your ticket might get you a seat by the window. The other one, your ticket might get you buried under a pile of hay. One of them was called the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul line. The other was called the Underground Railroad. Me, I was there for both, doing everything I could to make sure my passengers could get to where they was going. Now, that ain't how I started out. No, sir, I was born into slavery in 1818 down south in Greene County, Tennessee. Or maybe it was Canton, Mississippi. Can't nobody say for sure, and I guess it don't really matter. But what does matter is that my mother was black and my father was white. That made me what they called back then a mulatto. My name, Ezekiel, well, that's a name from the Bible. It means God makes strong. Now, one story says Ezekiel saw creatures in the sky that ran on wheels. Now, I don't rightly know about that, but I guess it would account for how come I did what I did later in life, and I sure enough did need to be made strong for what was to come. In my mid-20s, I left the South and came north to Indiana, where I met and married Sophia Anderson. I was earning a living working in a grocery store, but I heard there were more opportunities in a place called Milwaukee. So in 1854, Sophia and me, we packed up and took our 3 little girls, Mary, Samantha, and Emma, and headed north to Wisconsin. Milwaukee sure was different from Indiana. The streets were so busy with folks going about their business, and there were all kinds of people from all over. There were Yankees from New England, there were Indians and French Canadians, there were British, Irish, German, and Norwegian immigrants. There was even a small collection of black folk in the central business district. Some were fugitive slaves, others were free blacks that had left or been expelled from the southern states. Altogether, there was about 120 black people living in the city, and they was doing everything from personal and domestic services to merchants, storekeepers, masons, and even a dentist. Because Wisconsin was a free state, Milwaukee was a good place for black people to live and work. It's where I started my very first grocery store, and I became very involved with the community. Now, another thing that made Milwaukee such a good place to be was the railroad. The first railroad operated in 1851, connecting Milwaukee with Waukesha. By 1855, service to Chicago was available. By the end of the 60s, there was over 1,200 miles of railroad heading out from the city. There was even a connection to New York. Eventually, there were over 14 branches spreading out from the city, south along the river mouth, east-west along the Menominee Valley, north along the Milwaukee River. There were depots, rail yards, roundhouses. Yes, sir, it was something to behold. And I was lucky enough to get me a job as a porter on the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul line, one of the best routes there was. Now, I don't think it's bragging to say that over time I became one of that line's most respected and trusted employees. But again, that was the railroad you could see. There was another one you couldn't, and here's what that was like. You see, back in 1850, there was this thing called the Fugitive Slave Act. It meant that any escaped slaves had to be captured and returned to their owners, even if they was living in the so-called free states. So if you was escaping slavery, even if you was in a state that didn't practice that evil business, you still could be sent back. I think you might understand how getting from one place to another, from slavery to freedom, would be a mite difficult. It meant that you had to rely on others hiding and sneaking you around till you got someplace safe. That's what I became involved with in Milwaukee. I became a conductor on the stations of the Underground Railroad. I helped organize safe places for people to sleep, get food, fresh clothes. We helped make them strong for the next part of their journey to freedom. It was a dangerous business for everyone involved. And there was a famous case that proved it right here in Wisconsin. You see, there was a man called Joshua Glover. He escaped his bonds in St. Louis and come north to Racine, Wisconsin. He settled down for 2 years and worked in a flour mill, making a living for himself. But his former owner heard that he was there and come up north to reclaim him. There was a fight, but unfortunately, Glover was overpowered and arrested. He was taken to the county jail in Milwaukee. That ain't the end of it, though. Word spread like wildfire that Glover was there, and hundreds of abolitionists, led by a man named Sherman Booth, they come up to free him. They made a battering ram out of a wooden beam and broke down the door to the jail. I guess you could say Joshua made them walls come down. The crowd carried Glover through the streets to a nearby wagon loaded with hay. Thus began his journey on the Wisconsin leg of the Underground Railroad. Sherman Booth was arrested for his part in the ruckus. He got himself a lawyer called Byron Payne, a man that was to have a big effect on my life and many others too. You see, in 1865, I decided to exercise my right as a citizen and cast my vote, but I was turned away on the grounds that Wisconsin hadn't ever established the right of the black man to vote. Wisconsin had twice turned down such an amendment, even though the United States Constitution recognized us as free men. God bless you, Mr. Lincoln. Now, Mr. Payne, he told me we would fight this in the courts and that he would represent me. Mr. Booth, he paid Mr. Payne's fee, and we took my case all the way to the Wisconsin Supreme Court on March 28, 1866. To everyone's amazement, we won! The courts overturned the decisions that denied black suffrage, and Wisconsin became one of the first states to permit voting rights to black men. I became the first black voter to go to the polls with the Constitution on my side. Yes, sir, I was sure made strong. And Mr. Payne, he became a state Supreme Court justice himself, appointed by Governor Lucius Fairchild. His family's buried right over there. God bless you, Mr. Payne. Now, around this time, I set to starting out the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Milwaukee. Things was going pretty good, but unfortunately, I lost my wife, Sophie. Several years later, I married Catherine Lucas, and we moved to Chicago, where I died on March 31st, 1892. As a mark of respect for my many years of service, the railroad company brought my remains back to Milwaukee on a special train. I was buried in Forest Home Cemetery alongside of Milwaukee's most famous residents. And you know what else? I heard tell that just last year, a school in Madison, the Thomas Jefferson Middle School, was renamed in my honor, the Ezekiel Gillespie Middle School. Ain't that something? Oh. Now, if you excuse me, I think I hear a whistle blowing. If you listen closely, you might hear it too. It's the train to freedom, and it won't ever stop rolling.